At 5 in the morning on the 24th of May, 1998, 3 of the most experienced Sherpa working on the north side of Mount Everest reached the foot of the first step and found a woman in a bright purple jacket clipped to the fixed rope, stomach upward, head and legs hanging on either side. She had been there for 2 days. She was still alive. They did not yet know who she was. Pemba Sherpa had 2 Everest summits. Jangbu Sherpa had 2. Lhakpa Sherpa had 4. 8 summits between them, on a mountain that had killed several hundred people in the years they had been working it. They knelt around her. They tried to lift her. They listened to her speak. And then, in the dark, before the sun had come up over Tibet, the 3 of them did something that they would carry with them for the rest of their working lives. The woman in the purple jacket was Francys Arsentiev. 2 days earlier, on the 22nd of May, she had become the first American woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest without using bottled oxygen. By the time the Sherpas found her, she had spent 4 nights above 8,000 meters in the band of Everest that climbers and doctors call the death zone, where the human body does not adapt and cannot recover, and where the only thing it can do is begin to die. Francys Arsentiev was 40 years old. She had been born in Honolulu, raised partly in Switzerland, had earned a master's degree in business management, and had worked through the 1980s as an accountant in Telluride, Colorado. She had a son named Paul from a previous relationship. He was 11 years old. By the spring of 1998, she had become a serious mountaineer in the way that some Western women in their 30s become serious mountaineers, which is to say by marrying a Russian one and following him into the kinds of mountains that Americans rarely see. She had skied down Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe, the first American woman to do that. She had climbed Denali. She had made the first ascent with her husband of an unnamed 5,800-meter peak in the eastern Pamir Range, which the 2 of them had named Peak Goodwill in honor of the closing chapter of the Cold War. The South African climber Cathy O'Dowd, who had taken tea with Francys in a base camp tent that spring, would later say that Francys was not the obsessive type of climber. She talked about her son. She talked about her home. The reason she was lying at 8,600 meters with her head and legs hanging from the fixed rope was that she had wanted, very specifically, to do something that only a small number of human beings have ever done. She had wanted to be the first American woman to climb Mount Everest without bottled oxygen. The night before her summit attempt, her son, who was at home in Colorado, had a nightmare. In the dream, 2 climbers were stranded on a mountain in a storm, dying. Paul woke up frightened. He called her on the satellite phone at base camp. He asked her not to go. She told him, in the words he would later remember and repeat to interviewers for the rest of his childhood, that she had to do this. That conversation was the last one they would ever have. The man who had taught Francys how to do what she had wanted to do was named Sergei. Sergei Anatolievich Arsentiev was a national hero of the former Soviet Union. He had climbed the 5 highest peaks in the country, a body of work that earned him the honorary title of Snow Leopard. He had been awarded Master of Sport with honors at 30. He had been a lead climber on the 1989 Kangchenjunga Traverse, summiting all 3 of the mountain's tops in a single push. On the 7th of May, 1990, he had become the first Russian to climb Mount Everest without bottled oxygen, for which Mikhail Gorbachev had personally awarded him the National Friendship Medal of the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union dissolved, Sergei had moved to Telluride, where he had spent the last several years working as a carpenter on construction sites for an outfit owned by another climber. The men who hammered nails next to him had called him the Gentle Giant. He had met Francys on Annapurna in 1991. They had married a year later. They had climbed together in the 7 years of their marriage on most of the major mountains of the former Soviet Union. He was, by every available account, one of the most accomplished high-altitude climbers alive in the world. When the morning of the 23rd of May broke and his wife was still missing on the upper slopes of Everest, Sergei did what almost no one would have done in his position. Knowing better than almost anyone alive what altitude does to the human body, knowing what it would cost him. He went back into the death zone alone, carrying a canister of oxygen and a packet of medicine, and climbed back up toward where she might be. He was never seen alive again. The climb that had brought them to that moment had begun the previous week. On the 17th of May, Francys and Sergei moved up from advanced base camp to the North Core. On the 18th, they reached 7,700 meters. On the 19th, they set up at Camp 6, 8,203 meters above sea level, and Sergei radioed down to base that they were in good shape and would push for the summit at 1 in the morning. On the 20th, just below the first step, their headlamps failed in the dark and they turned around. On the 21st, the wind was too strong, and they aborted again, having climbed only 50 to 100 meters from camp. By the time they began their successful summit push on the 22nd of May, they had spent 3 nights above 8,000 meters. The body at that altitude does not sleep so much as catalog its own deterioration. They climbed slowly that day because they were not breathing the canisters of compressed air that everyone else on the upper mountain was breathing. They reached the summit late, far later than the 2 o'clock turnaround time that every climber on Everest is taught to honor. They were going to have to spend a 4th night above 8,000 meters, and then in the dark coming down, they got separated. The first people to find Francys were Uzbek climbers. They had been on their way up to the summit on the morning of the 23rd when they came across her below the first step, lying half-conscious from oxygen deprivation, her hands and face already deep into frostbite, unable to walk. They did the thing that the rules of high-altitude climbing strictly tell you not to do, which is that they stopped their summit attempt and they tried to save her. They put their oxygen on her. They tried to carry her down. They tried until their own oxygen had run out and they were too weak from the altitude to continue, at which point they had to make the calculation that high-altitude climbers eventually make, which is whether they wanted to die with her or descend without her. They descended without her. As they reached camp that evening, they passed a man climbing back up. He was carrying a canister of oxygen and a packet of medicine. He asked them if they had seen his wife. They told him where she was. They watched him keep climbing. He was already exhausted. The sun was setting. The Uzbek climbers were the last people anywhere in the world to see Sergei Arsentiev alive. When Pemba, Jangbu, and Lhakpa Sherpa reached the woman in the purple jacket the next morning, the man with the oxygen and the medicine was nowhere on the mountain. His ice axe lay near her. His coil of rope lay near her. He was simply gone. The Sherpas were climbing with the South African expedition led by Ian Woodall, and they had with them the South African climber Cathy O'Dowd, the same woman who had taken tea with Francys 2 months earlier. O'Dowd recognized her. Her later account of what she saw is the cleanest record of the encounter that exists. Francys's hands had swollen to twice their size. Her face had the milky, almost porcelain pallor that severe frostbite produces, smooth and very still and not quite peaceful. She was conscious enough to speak, she said, repeatedly during the half hour, and then the full hour they spent trying to figure out whether they could move her. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me alone. At one point, she asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" She said, "I am American." They tried, first the 4 of them and then the 6 of them, working in a wind that made conversation difficult, to get her into a sitting position. They tried to replace some of the clothing that had iced up against her skin. They got an oxygen mask onto her face. None of it changed her. The damage that had been done to her body during her 2 days on the mountain was, by the standards of high-altitude rescue, simply too extensive. Pemba Sherpa, who had 2 Everest summits, looked at the situation and made the assessment that he had been hired and trained over many years to make. He turned around and walked back down the mountain with Kathy O'Dowd and Ian Woodall. Jangbu Sherpa and a Lhakpa Sherpa, who had 6 Everest summits between them, kept climbing past her toward the top of the mountain because someone had paid for them to reach it, and because the woman in the purple jacket, by every measure that mattered to people who had spent their working lives in this part of Everest, was no longer something they could save. She would die a few hours later, conscious to the end, alone again on the fixed rope. Sergei was found a year later. The 1999 Mallory and Irving expedition was on the upper north face of Everest, searching for the body of George Mallory, the British climber who had disappeared in 1924, when one of its members, the American climber Jake Norton, found a different body lower down the face from where Francys had died, in a position that was consistent with a long fall. The clothing matched, the equipment matched. He had not made it back to her. He had been climbing alone, in the dark, in the death zone, with a canister of oxygen in his pack and a packet of medicine, and he had fallen. Whether he had fallen on the way up to where she was lying or on the way back down after reaching her and finding her dead has never been established and never will be. Francys Arsentiev's body remained where the Sherpas had left it for almost 9 years. The bright purple jacket was visible from a long way down the route. As Everest tourism expanded through the early 2000s, climbers passing her on summit day began to photograph her. The photographs spread first through the climbing community and then through the broader internet. Someone, in the way that the internet is always doing this, gave her a nickname. They called her Sleeping Beauty because of the position she had ended up in and the smooth, undeteriorating quality of her face in the cold. The nickname stuck. The body became, for a generation of climbers and a generation of internet users, more famous than the woman who had once been inside it. In May 2007, almost 9 years to the day after he had walked away from her, Ian Woodall returned to Everest. He came back specifically for Francys. The expedition was called the Tau of Everest, and its purpose was to locate her body, to remove it from the climbing route, and to give it some quiet. He brought an American flag and a note that her son Paul, now 20 years old, had written for her. He wrapped her in the flag and placed the note inside the wrappings. He moved her body away from the route, down the slope, to a position out of view of the climbers who would pass that spot in the seasons to come. He performed a brief ceremony. When asked later why he had spent the money and the breath to return for a stranger he had been forced to leave on a mountain, he said it would probably be his last expedition, and that he thought it appropriate to give something back. He had carried her in his mind for 9 years. She had wanted to be the first. He had wanted to bring her home. 3 Sherpas before sunrise on 24th of May, 1998, knew that neither of those things would happen. There is a question that climbers, ethicists, and families of the dead have argued about for almost 30 years, which is whether Pemba, Jangbu, and Lhakpa could have done something different that morning. They are, each of them, the wrong people to ask. They were there. Above 8,000 meters, knowing what is going to happen is not the same as a warning, and a warning is not the same as a rescue, and a rescue is not the same as a mountain that has decided to keep someone. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, click on your screen.